This is Miss Lim over here. Hi, so welcome to the very end. So this is the e-learning day where actually we'll be going through one important topic of tying all the various loose ends of everything that we have learned in macro so far. Right? So this topic is what we call your interconnectedness and conflicts of macro objectives. Right? So in this topic, what we're going to learn, we're going to understand these various outcomes. You must first understand what are the challenges faced by government in their attempt to achieve all its various macroeconomic aims simultaneously. Right? We understand there are constraints faced by government. So is it possible for governments to achieve all these aims simultaneously, concurrently at the same time? Right? Secondly, we're going to explain how these macro problems are interconnected with one another. Right? So for example, between EG and inflation, maybe EG and unemployment as well. How are all these macro problems actually interconnected with one another? Third, we're going to assess if these conflicts necessarily occur all the time. Alright, so there might be cases where government might be able to deconflict certain macro aims while able to achieve them concurrently at the same time. Alright, there must be certain conditions that needs to take place before such things happen. Last but not least, you must be able to explain possible trade-off that may occur between all these various key objectives. Alright, so without further ado, let's go into it. So in trying to meet our various macro objectives, understand there are four key questions we have to ask ourselves. The when, how, trade-offs, as well as a policy choice. So the interconnectedness of macro problems present to us two things. First, when will all this conflict actually happen? So what are the conditions, under what circumstances do conflict in macro objectives actually occur? And the second question, how? Which is the symptom and which is the root cause in terms of this intertwined interconnectedness of problem? Sometimes it's easy to say in theory, we can analyze it, it's simple, but in reality, it is a jumbled up mess, right? So in asking ourselves next, because of this interconnectedness of problems, government has to make certain policy decisions, right? So what are the trade-offs, meaning to say the negative side effects or the negative unintended consequences that will arise in the use of certain policies? Because by comparing and be informed and aware of the trade-off, this is where government will then be able to make an informed, optimal choice that will be best able to serve its intended desired outcome. It might not just be one policy, often you need to have a policy combination, yeah? So just to present the link, interconnectedness of problem will then present to us the challenges for government to make decisions. So the various skills that we're going to discuss this time, we're going to look at the various conflicts and how these problems are interconnected with one another. We're going to evaluate the policies in terms of their effectiveness, underpinning them by using ADAS and with reference to our dear economy of Singapore. Okay, so same four questions that we're going to go through in our analysis. So recall, these are the four macro objectives of any government. Can these four be achieved in tandem, concurrently, simultaneously? I always see running an entire economy like driving or trying to fly an airplane. There are various controls that the government has to be very mindful of. Sometimes certain controls, you have a blinking red light, tang, tang, tang. So the government will have to then urgently address that problem. So it's not as simple, right, as a government trying to maintain and keep an entire economy not only surviving but thriving. So let's look at what are the various problems and how are they actually being presented in the scenario. We're going to come up with a few scenarios in the next few slides. So ask yourself, how are these problems actually connected to one another? And when, the second question, what are the conditions then necessarily be there for these objectives to be or not be in conflict? Alright, just like the beautiful visual over there, where we have a kaleidoscope, where we can see the images all coming together to present itself a beautiful front. Okay, so first portion, interconnectedness on page 3 between price stability and EG plus employment. So the context in 1973, OPEC, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, exerted power to increase the price of oil. Needless to say, as price of oil increase, COP will go up as oil is needed in almost everything. Alright, so you have an increase in cost push inflation in many oil imported countries, right? So the rise in COP leads to a fall in AS, therefore a fall in real output. As output fall, the demand for labor fall, unemployment goes up. There will also be a fall in EG due to a fall in real output as well. So you can see how inflation, price instability is connected to growth and employment. Vice versa, if you have a country that have very low inflation, stable prices, this is fundamental for confidence in consumers and investors because nobody wants uncertainty because it's easier to make long-term kind of consumption and production decisions, isn't it? Like, should I expand my firm by building another factory? Because if the prices are not stable, I won't be able and not certain to do it. Right? Fundamentally, this is very important for a country that wants to drive long-term growth. Alright, so ask yourself this question, which one is the symptom, which one is the root cause, like what I've said just now. Easy to analyze in theory on paper, but very hard in reality because they're just intertwined and interconnected together. You can also recall to your policy tutorial question 1B between the twin threats of global recession and imported cost push inflation. Look at the answer to then be able to decipher which one actually should the government prioritize because that will be the one that is the root cause of this entire issue. Okay? So this is the graphics, the diagrams of how this can actually be drawn. Increase in COP due to higher oil price leads to a fall in AS 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 shift up and you have a fall in real output, therefore a higher unemployment and yep, that is what will happen. Second one, interconnectedness between inflation and balance of payment. Alright, so assuming a country has a very or relatively higher inflation rate, let's say in Singapore, so your prices of Singapore's exports are now relatively more expensive while the prices of imports into Singapore will be relatively cheaper. So needless to say, this will have a direct impact on X minus M, assuming PD of X and PD of M are more than 1. So this will lead to a worsening of your balance of trade as inflation will directly affect your prices of exports as well as your relative price of imports. Therefore, worsening your balance of trade, ceteris paribus, worsening of your balance of payment. So not only prices will affect your balance of trade. Remember under balance of payment, yeah, this is for H2 students because we are going into the last goal of your balance of trade or balance of payment in a favorable position. H1, you can ignore this. High and unstable prices will provide uncertainty and this is the worst thing in attracting your foreign direct investment. So if foreign direct investment, let's say Microsoft or Samsung, are no longer confident in Singapore due to the high inflation, price instability, a reduced inflow in our FDI will lead to a worsening of our financial and capital account, KFA, capital and financial account, worsening our balance of payment as well. Alright, so you can see continuing into how we link the inflation and the effect on exchange rate. So imagine a country, importantly, has inflation because inflation actually reduces your internal value of money, but it can also directly affect your external value as what we have just seen in the previous slide. Yeah. So when you have inflation, the country with a higher inflation will necessarily then lose exports competitiveness, will start to import more because imports prices are relatively cheaper. This leads to a depreciation of its currency as the demand for the currency in the forex market falls. Nobody buys your exports, demand for currency falls, as well as the people in your country starts to import a lot more. This is about increasing supply, isn't it? You are using your currency in purchase for other goods and services from other countries. Fall in demand, increase in supply will lead to depreciation of your currency in the forex as compared to other currencies, ceteris paribus. Therefore, the link between internal value in terms of inflation versus external value, look at your exchange rate. There's a clear link over there. But please, students, please pay attention to how these two concepts are connected, but they are distinctly different. A lot of students always see these two as the same. No, okay? So self-assessment on page 4, try it out on your own. How will all these problems actually affect your other macro goals? Alright, so your other macro goals, linking particularly looking at EG, you have your sustainable EG, where for example, how can it affect actually your government budget position? Will the government budget actually be in a deficit? Alright, like negative growth, government have to spend more in the current context. Like last year, COVID-19, government have to increase spending through fiscal policy just to prioritize the urgent need to drive EG and lower unemployment. But that just means our budget for the government has just turned into a deficit, and that might lead to long-term kind of sustainable growth and the challenges faced. Alright, so I'll give you all some time on your own to unpack all this. I don't think it's very tough. Link it, and then if you have any issues, always seek help from your tutors when necessary. Alright, so let's go on to the next part when we talk about the implications for policy decisions. Because policy decisions, like what I've said just now, before government make any decisions, there are always trade-offs involved. Once you choose, right, there will be an unintended consequence that comes. What are the negative side effects? And it's always important for government to be aware of such trade-off before weighing, right, the pros and cons, the cost and the benefit, before deciding what would be the final best outcome, best policy or policy combination to serve its desired goal, right?